Yeah. So this is going to be our first sort of conversations and around iiNDYVERSE and what we do, but also around trends as a whole within marketing, music marketing, fashion, sneaker culture, and the subject that we're looking at today is how Gen Z, millennials, but also Gen Alpha are engaging online today, and what's going on with those key tools that they're using. I kind of wanted to kick this conversation up by starting with talking around what's happening with Instagram at the moment. I saw a really interesting podcast conversation, on TikTok, which is quite funny, about Instagram, the engagement and the way that their users are using it nowadays. They have three top functions or features, let's say. One is feed, which is your normal square post. The second is stories, and then the third is IG messaging. The interesting point from this podcast was that the most used feature of Instagram at the moment was the messenger.
I think it's cool. I think it shows that, especially with Gen Zs, with this whole movement around mental health and burnout with social media, and then the need, I guess, to keep up with all your friends and have this Instagram profile and way of life, right? That it's a lot of pressure, right? It's like you feel like you have to maintain a certain amount of posts just to keep relevant, to keep followerships, to keep likes going. And it causes mental health issues, not just for the regular folks like you and me, but you see it even with celebrities, right, or influencers. It's taxing. So I think it's not surprising to me that people are starting to find ways to still communicate, but in a more private channel like DMs, where it's not there for the world to see, but they're still sharing posts of like videos and images and everything else as you would in a feed, but with people that really matter, which I think is fascinating. I think it's a clear trend. And it's funny, like
Yeah.
I saw some stats. I think it came from like Enterprise Apps Today. It's this website, and they did a study on how teens were communicating during the pandemic. And you know what the number one method of communication was in the U.S. during the pandemic? So of social media,
No idea.
texting, messenger apps, emails. Number one form of communication was text message. 83% of
Very
people,
American.
yeah, very American, but still, 83% of people said that they preferred it was text message. Only 66% said social media, right? And only 37% said email. Which is fascinating as well. See, so the point is, I think, especially with text, again, that interactive vibe, you're seeing a lot of people, especially in the US, are opting towards more one-to-one communications, right? Or at least close communications within that teens, like
Yeah.
Z, or I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely, to your point there around emails, for example, it's no one wants to write an email or even receive emails where it's hey, blah blah, hope you're doing well, yours sincerely, Bryan. It's kind of like this old method of communication, and people have grown up, especially when we're looking at Gen Z and the next generation that are going to come through. They've grown up with instant messenger as such a strong communication tool at the forefront of how they view the world, whereas email is very much it's a knock on from letters back in the day, and it's, I think that those communication methods, especially when you think about brands as a whole, or creators, musicians, sneaker companies, all using that old method to send people communications, when actually the people they're trying to target aren't using those forms of communication or don't want to use those forms of communication.
Yeah, if I think of why, even I'm not a millennial, but if I think of why anyone of any generation uses email now, it's probably one of two things. It's the first thing, if you're of age, it's work, because you have to check your emails for work. That's not fun. And then the second thing, usually, at least for me, is like newsletters. Like I'm just getting hammered by brands trying to sell me shit, right? And they're dropping
Mm.
6, 7 emails a week at times. I'm just literally filtering through to see what type of offers are out there. If I don't click on anything, I don't engage unless it's something very specific that I already like. It's like I'm doing my own filtering, right? So everything else, the inbox is filtering out for me. So it's funny, man, because the industry, and I get it, because emails are so like everyone has an email account basically in this world, even though I'd argue everyone has a phone number in this world as well. Um,
Mm.
Brands still just hammer you with emails, and it works in their mind because they get like a 3% click through rate. So they're like, okay, 3% of a million is still a big number, right? But people are fatigued. And as you said, like people aren't checking emails when they actually want to interact or do something. They're in messenger apps, they're in SMS. And that's where the fun and activity really is, right? That's where the engagement is. So let's see how long that lasts with email.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think harking on to your point of where where people are and thinking about work, especially around email and stuff. I've seen recently there's a bit of a phenomenon, especially when you look at the more tech focused space in, let's say, Discord or Telegram, which again are really interesting messaging apps. Discord obviously set up early on because PlayStation and Xbox didn't talk to each other. So there was no way if you had a PlayStation and your friend had an Xbox that you could communicate whilst playing games. So you had to set up an off-platform space for that, and that's where Discord came from. But now it's been adopted by everyone from art collectives through to fashion brands like Gucci, etc. And then Telegram, very much, I would say, adopted by the Web3 era, and a lot of the kind of groups within that space. But what's happening now is you're seeing the gamification, because these messaging platforms have come out a bit later and they use different format. Thinking about the internet and connectivity and the internet culture. I saw this really fun crypto project that came out that was essentially it's called Bulletproof, and the idea is that you go into the Telegram, there's 3 people, 5 people, 10 people commit a certain amount of their tokens into a pool, and then as it basically plays a game. So you select, you put /shoot and you shoot, and it's kind of like Russian roulette where you shoot, and if there's nothing in the chamber, then you get through to the next round. If there is something in the chamber, you get killed, and the game moves on, and the tokens get split between whoever's left over. So it's kind of like just silly, fun things, but you can do all of that stuff because of the technology behind those apps, which is really incredible. And I think people are really bringing that gamification from gaming into those apps because you have a much broader sense. I know WhatsApp is fantastic, very difficult to work with at the moment, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how many people start to think about those other areas, and it'd be cool to get your thoughts on where you think that's going.
I think it's fascinating, man. I mean, even like to this where you started like, with Discord, like I did not even know that's why they came about. I thought it just came about to just drive communication and community, because those tools didn't exist, as you said, in an interoperable way, for gamers. But I think that's what we're seeing too, man. Is like as you said, like these brands experimenting with Discord. I don't think it works for everything, because it's still so busy and so crowded. Like there's only a certain type of user that's probably hyper engaged that would be living in a Discord server. It's so noisy. It's still unsafe as well. So I think that has a role to play, but it's a very niche segment. Think of a brand's fan base, and then yeah, like what?
So
Yeah,
would you arguably say that they're super fans?
Yeah, they have to be even more like hyper fans or something, right? Because I love there's certain brands I love, like both of us, like we love Gucci Vault, right? I'm on the Gucci Vault server. I've gone to all their pop up stores. I have Gucci Vault stuff. So do you. I think I'm a hardcore fan of Gucci Vault, but I can't remember the last time I logged into their Discord server. What's ironic, I probably checked their emails though. But that's because that's the only option I have, you know? Yeah, which is funny. But yeah, I think it's there's this gap, and in Asia they've solved it, right? They have these super apps, these WeChats and stuff like that, Line and stuff, where they've managed to bring everything in one place in a messenger app, where you can pretty much have an all-you-can-eat sort of interface that works for that culture. That just hasn't worked for us in the Western world quite yet. Um, so I think it's still like fragmented. You see, I think Telegram and the blockchain communities killed it, right? Like anytime we go to a blockchain conference and you want to connect with someone, the first option is Telegram, right? So you're forced to engage with Telegram. The tools are great. You can build communities, either announcement-based communities, like many to many communication-based communities, or have one-on-one chats all in one place, right? It's sick. And you have bots. You can do so many cool things to take it from just like an individual user to like a pro user or even a business user, right? So I think they smashed it, but somehow Telegram hasn't been able to make that shift from this cool, very useful messaging app plus more for the blockchain community into something that anyone would use, whether you're into blockchain or not, right? So they, which is a shame. So I think brands are trying to solve that. And to me, the problem I see is the tools today just suck. Sorry, but it sucks. It's frustrating. We've lived through that frustration. Like SMS is great if it's just one market. If you're just in the US and you want to do SMS, it's amazing, right? If you have brands or customers that operate internationally, it becomes a ball ache, right? It becomes horrible. Like different pricing, different rules and regulations, not just at a national level, but at an operator level. It's just a nightmare to manage. And then WhatsApp should be better, but they're not quite there, especially for creators, right? If you're an established creator trying to do a WhatsApp communication or WhatsApp interaction with your super fans or any fan base, there's so many hoops and hurdles to go through. They're still overly protective of how you even message fans, how you can create bots. So with Telegram does bots is still a tough process. And I think literally they're the ones missing the opportunity. Like something like what 3 billion people on WhatsApp across the globe, and they still haven't been able to offer anything as comparative to Telegram in terms of an interface.
Mm. Yeah, I find it interesting and an interesting challenge for them. And I think with that international, with how many users one app can cover, it's really interesting because I'm sure from back in your telecom days, you understand that there's various different telecom companies that you would work with in each different region. Everybody has different prices. It's a very complex system. WhatsApp and the internet and Telegram and the internet and Discord and the internet makes it very simple to have a centralized company, let's say, that runs and works the communications within that region. So I think I can imagine the challenges that they have in trying to navigate all of the legal bits. With when we're working with Nike, we've seen that, and we understand the different challenges that a big company like that has across various different territories and getting everybody aligned. And I'm sure anybody who works with bigger brands before or has worked with bigger brands before understands those kind of challenges. So it's not an easy fix, especially when you have such a massive audience. But I think something that to move this conversation into a slightly different space. I was listening to a podcast with Will Page, who is the chief economist up at Spotify, and he was talking about this. There's a really interesting bunch of stats that came out recently around what he's calling globalization, which is funny because we used that term a lot with brands back in the day. It's this idea of when we were doing brand strategies at my past company, that it's the idea of having this global reach, but actually what is needed is to have localization within those markets with your brand and your product. And he was talking, I think there was a paper written by a Scottish scholar up in Aberdeen that sort of first coined the term in 1995. But it definitely rings true. And what they're seeing at the moment, if you look at the music charts, for example, is that within, I think in the UK, either last year, I think it was last year, 2022, all of the top 10 artists were British. That's something that's happening all across Europe as well, though. All the German top 10 artists were German and in the Germanic language. And the same was happening. Spain is a little bit different. There's a lot of LATAM artists in there, but still speaking in their native language. And if you look at Poland, it's the top 20 artists within that space, chart wise, all are Polish speaking within the music. So what we're seeing is, that there's this globalization of music and, being able to access some content from everywhere, but actually when you come down to it, what people are absorbing within that country is something that is very unique to their locale and the interest within that country. So that, I think, is a really interesting
That makes sense, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think this naturally makes sense. You look at the world today, even at a political level, right? You're seeing there is this underlying push back just intuitively against globalization, right? Like obviously epitomized by Americanization of the world, right? And they're starting to reel back now. But that sentiment, I think, applies universally. It's not just a political sentiment. I think it's a cultural sentiment, right? And then culture then turns into what do you like music wise, what do you like fashion wise, as well. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I think it's pretty weird, because I'm a big fan of what you just mentioned too. I think um, another way to frame it is focus on your like niche, right? On your core fan base, on your tribe. And if you're a German artist, most likely 10 times of 9 out of 10 times, your tribe is probably people from Germany. So don't neglect that. Don't think you need to be this ideal of some universally globally appealable brand or artist, because it just backfires. I think that's something we've seen. It's interesting. The flip side of that, which is funny, is at the same time I feel as a globe, we're more attuned to different cultures. The simplest thing that everyone recognizes now more than ever is probably food. Like I think more than ever we understand what good Chinese is, what good Malaysian is, what good British or European food is. That probably 10, 15 years ago, people wouldn't have that sense of I guess I won't say wokeness, but that sense of like understanding. So it works in
Mm.
that way too, right? It's like even though I might be British, I probably have a better understanding of what a good bibimbap tastes like, right? Partly because of those influences, and those people actually staying true to their culture and bringing it to a new culture. We're just trying to create this kind of like, what's the right word, like one size fits all, a safe choice sort of model. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Mm. And I think one of the really interesting things that, thinking about what you were talking there was the hip hop, for example, has had a massive influence globally. But what's happening in those markets, for example, the top 10 Polish artists were hip hop artists, but in the Polish language. Very similar in Germany, a lot of hip hop influence. So you're getting that global influence, but then it's very local. And I think when thinking about some of the artists that we work with, for example, like Crystal Fighters, and how they have, a lot of their audience is Spanish speaking, they're based in the UK. So thinking about setting up those different language spaces, and that's one of the things I think that excited us about WhatsApp, for example, is being able to have create those different communities within the app, and let them kind of run, but also then think about how is it going to play out in the future when you have your English speaking group and you can use AI to translate that, and take your promotional materials over to that Spanish speaking group like that.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. It has to be easy, and it has to be authentic. I think that's going back to like where we started, like SMS and Instagram DMs. It's like you still need. The thing is, like we're moving away. Or to me, the market's already almost there from this broadcast communication thing, which email is sort of famous for, but definitely social media is famous for. To now where people need some more like one-to-one interactions, and even if that feels more authentic, and I think then you can take something that might be local and globalize it, right? So to your point, I can take something that like Crystal Fighters, as a British brand that works very well in Spain, to then figure out how I can then expand that in an authentic way to other people who just respect what I do at a cultural level. And then you can take it to South America, for example. Instead of trying to have a massacre from day one, you just build an audience who respects you for your authenticity and what you stand for, versus trying to appeal to a wider base that most people just can't resonate with because it's not individual enough. Because people are much more sophisticated now, right? Like we know what's good, we know what's great now. I think that's one of the positive things about maybe social media. Um, we've gotten so much more information and so much more understanding what good really is. That's why like I would wear Japanese clothes. Not that I've ever been to Japan, right? But I've got so much information about it. Like there's things that appeal to me now, right? So I understand what that looks like. I understand what a good ramen is now, right? So I'm more discerning as a customer. That's because I've spent time to get to a level of detail, and more people, especially millennials, and I'm sure Gen Alpha will be the same way. They'll be so much more tuned to what's bullshit, right? And it'll be so much more tuned in terms of, are you talking to me at the right level versus just trying to like cheaply broadcast to me. That will make a huge difference in terms of the success or failure of a brand or an artist or an influencer. And these channels are going to play a big role in making that happen, right? We talk, everyone uses that C word, right? Community. But, and it's the same thing. They're using the C word, but they're not using authentically. And then going back to Discord, like what made Discord so special is because it didn't start off as a everything for everyone sort of platform, right? We focused very heavily on making it right for gamers. And now they're trying to expand and you're seeing some problems with that. But the truth is they actually focused on something that people cared about. And that's how they build a community. I think brands need to respect that too. Is if you want to build a community, you have to really focus on things that matter. You need to be able to speak to your customers and your fans at that level. Because you do have fans as a brand, right? Like we don't use the word consumers. We don't use the word customers even. We call our clients, like people who follow them and buy from them and listen to their music, fans. Or even buy clothes from them, fans, because that's what they are. And that's the people we're going after. You have to engage with them differently.
Rounding, as you said, back to the IG Messenger sort of stat from the beginning of this, it's really that is the most authentic communication because people are deciding to share it individually to their friends or with a tight knit group. But that is creating so much traction now, and I think what it's funny to see what Instagram has done with their broadcast feature, which is trying to figure out a way to monetize and change it into a one-way sales channel, which is always the typical thing for big companies, right? Is how do we make it something where we can just get our point across and our agenda and everything else? And I think there's definitely going to be space elsewhere to create more brand affinity through, as you said, that it's funny when you say the words community and authenticity because they come around every so often, every like 3 or 4 years. It's suddenly, oh, everything needs to be about community again, everything needs to be authentic again, and brands continue to go through this cycle. But it is the truth is when they're challenged by newcomers who are authentic and who have a community, that's when it becomes an important agenda for them, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. And how it's like I was thinking about how do you do individuality at scale? Like it's a really tough thing to do. But that's a challenge, right? And there's different ways to slice that pie. Really, I think about they want to go there. That's another conversation. But like you look at Instagram and you look at their model, um, and it's to me it's very different when you compare Instagram, let's say, and even TikTok is doing phenomenally well. But you compare that to like a Roblox, for example, or even a Fortnite, right? So more and more people, as you talk about millennials, Gen Zs, and Gen X, are just natural born gamers, right? And so they're spending more time gaming than any other media form. And when you look at gaming, it is an all-encompassing thing, right? Is you can interact, you can socialize, you can talk to people, like a chat, you can call, you can play games within games. You can. It's an economy. You have a digital representation of yourself. You have individuality, and I think that's birthing another level of community and authenticity at scale. Um, that that people need to look out for. Because what's happening too is these platforms are much more open to some extent than social media platforms. They allow people to create their own worlds, right? Create their own clothing, right? Earn money in different ways. Um, and I think it's going to be phenomenal to see how everyone participates in that, right? In an authentic way again. Because I think there's going to be this bridge happening in terms of how you interact and interface in the physical world, which is what your virtual world looks like. And right now, it's a complete disconnect. But that I'm sure that creates a dissonance in people's minds, right? And there's probably opportunities to take some things you love in the physical world and bring it with you to flex or just represent yourself in a digital space. Especially for Gen Alphas, they like every 9-year-old, 10-year-old I know wants Roblox. I'm sorry, Robux as a gift, right? Why? To buy clothing online, right? It's mad. And then in Fortnite, you know it, like Travis Scott's concert, 26 million he made. I think Epic Games made 56 million in virtual items. It's mad. We both know, and most people know, that if you really want to get someone's attention, the effectiveness of email is probably the lowest on the rung of options. But because of its mass appeal, people still just push it, right? They don't think about the cost of having to create templates, test it, then send those emails and probably send three, four just to get to a reasonable return. Um, but the flip side of that is like because Gen Zs, millennials, Gen Alphas, well, not quite Gen Alphas yet, at least not most of them, because they're in these DM channels, SMS in the US, Instagram DMs, for example, WhatsApp is the biggest one of them all. It is better to as a method to reach them, but it is harder. It is more complex, right? So it takes a certain level of understanding and maturity to make that stuff work, not just as a brand or as a creator, but also even on the flip side, these platforms need to figure this out, right? And that's something we're trying to solve, right, on both sides. But the thing to keep in mind is it does come at a cost, right? So we know, like, if you want to send an SMS, when the US is less than a penny, great. But if you're in Europe, it can cost you 5 cents, US cents, to send an SMS. So all of a sudden, you need to be really careful around like what types of engagement you're gonna have with your best fans in which channels. It doesn't mean email is a bad thing that you should forget about it, but you should think about building up a channel that's higher engagement and use it for things that deliver higher revenue, higher ROI, right? Higher returns as a brand or as an influencer. But the problem is today people just forget about it completely. They don't think about building up a WhatsApp channel or an SMS channel, and they're missing out on. I think if you look at the maths, like 3% on email versus 50 to 60% on mobile like SMS or WhatsApp. That's up to 20x return, right? That's just not on the table if you don't have a WhatsApp channel or a mobile channel. So brands and customers meaning artists and influencers need to really think about that. Even Instagram, the Instagram post on Instagram, you're lucky to get 2.4% click-through rates, right? So again, 20 times lower than SMS or WhatsApp. So I think that's a huge thing to solve, and that's what we're about. That's where the Gen Zs are. That's where the millennials are, and that's where brands and artists and influencers need to be.